AITA for leaving my fiancée right after proposing because she wanted one last try with her ex? I met Madison a little over 2 years ago. When we started dating, we were the same age, and from the beginning, it seemed like we were both looking for very similar things in our lives. Our relationship didn't start in a dramatic or impulsive way. It was quite the opposite, actually. Calm, natural, as if all the pieces had just fallen into place. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party at a popular downtown bar. To be honest, I didn't really feel like going out that night. I had been stuck in a rut of work and home for several weeks, so in the end, I decided to go just for a change of scenery. Madison was there, talking to a small group of people. She wasn't the loudest person at the party, but she didn't go unnoticed either. She had a calm and confident way of expressing herself. And something that really caught my attention was that she genuinely listened when someone spoke. She didn't just wait for her turn to talk. She seemed truly interested in what others were saying. We ended up talking for a good part of the night. At first, we talked about simple things. Our jobs, music we liked, recent movies, the typical conversations you have when you first meet someone. But as the hours passed, the conversation started to get a bit deeper. We started talking about our goals, our plans for the future, and how we imagined our lives down the road. It was at that moment when I heard something that I would remember many times later. Madison said her biggest dream in life was to build a large family. She didn't mention it like a passing comment. On the contrary, she explained it in quite a bit of detail. She said she wanted to get married, have several kids, live in a nice house in the suburbs, and build a stable family. She spoke about all of this with a conviction that surprised me, and to be honest, many of those ideas were also in my head. Maybe I didn't say it with the same enthusiasm she did, but I had always imagined something similar. A solid relationship, kids someday, and a peaceful home after years of hard work. When we finished that conversation, I remember thinking it was unusual to find someone who had such a similar vision of life. At the end of the night, we exchanged numbers, and a few weeks later, we started dating. Our relationship wasn't perfect, of course, but for a long time, it was pretty good. We weren't one of those couples who spent all their time arguing or creating unnecessary drama. We had disagreements like any couple, but nothing that seemed really serious. Madison was a very organized person. She always had plans in mind, trips she wanted to take, career goals, and even very clear ideas about how she imagined her life in 5 or 10 years. She often brought up the topic of marriage, and she didn't do it vaguely or theoretically. She said it directly. For example, she would mention things like wanting to get married before turning 30, or she would also say she didn't want to have just one child, but at least 3. At first, I found it interesting to hear her speak with such certainty about those kinds of things, but over time, that topic became completely normal in our conversations. We even joked about it. She would say that someday we would live in a noisy house with kids running everywhere. I would reply that I would probably have to soundproof the walls in my office if I ever wanted to get any work done. Those kinds of jokes. As the months went by, our relationship started to get more serious. Around the 6-month mark, I met her family. They seemed like nice people, and everything flowed pretty well. I had no issues with any of them, and I remember one time her mother told me that Madison seemed calmer and more grounded since she had been with me. I also introduced her to my family. My parents welcomed her, and my friends seemed to get along with her. At that moment, honestly, I didn't see any red flags that made me think something was wrong, nothing that raised suspicions. There was something I did know from the beginning. Madison had been in a long-term relationship before she met me. She had been with someone for several years, and that relationship had ended shortly before we met. I don't remember exactly how much time had passed between one relationship and the other, but I did know that this ex-boyfriend had been a significant person in her life. Even so, I never saw it as a problem. Madison explained to me that the relationship had ended because it simply wasn't working anymore. According to her, there were too many differences, frequent arguments, and their life paths were no longer aligned. Nothing out of the ordinary. Over time, that topic stopped coming up in our conversations, and our relationship continued to move forward normally. We reached our 1-year anniversary and celebrated it with a simple dinner. It wasn't anything over the top, but it was a lovely night. By that time, I was already pretty clear about how I felt about her. It wasn't an impulsive emotion or a passing fling. It was more of a feeling of stability, as if I were with the right person. During our second year together, things got even more serious. We started talking about the possibility of moving in together at some point. We didn't do it right away because we both had our own jobs and apartment leases that hadn't ended yet, but the idea was already on the table. Madison also started mentioning marriage more often. She said she would like a simple but beautiful wedding. Nothing too luxurious, though definitely something special and meaningful. Sometimes we even talked about possible honeymoon destinations. There was one place that constantly came up in those conversations: Punakana. Madison had always wanted to travel there. It wasn't a casual comment she made just once. She mentioned it quite often. She said she loved the beaches there, the color of the water, and the peaceful vibe it seemed to have. She had seen many photos and repeated that she wanted to visit it someday. I had never traveled to that destination, but gradually, the idea also started sticking in my head. The months kept passing, and our relationship seemed to be moving exactly toward what we had imagined from the start. That was when I started thinking seriously about marriage. It wasn't a sudden decision. I had been mulling it over for several months. I thought about our relationship, how we worked together, and the goals we shared. Everything seemed to indicate that this was the logical next step. Besides, our second anniversary was approaching, and I wanted to do something truly special, something we would both remember for a long time. That was when I remembered all the times Madison had talked about Punakana. The idea started forming slowly in my mind. A special trip for our anniversary, and if everything went as I hoped, a marriage proposal. The problem was that this trip wasn't exactly cheap, at least not for me. I work in accounting at a mid-sized company where the salary is stable, but it doesn't allow for big expenses without careful planning. So I made a decision to start saving. For several months, I cut out many unnecessary expenses. I stopped going out to expensive dinners, postponed buying new gadgets for myself, and slowly put money away into a separate savings account. Every little bit of savings was part of the same plan. If everything went well, that trip would be the start of a new chapter for both of us. I didn't tell Madison anything about what I was organizing. I wanted it to be a complete surprise. After several months of saving money and watching every dollar, I finally managed to scrape together enough to make it happen. So I booked the trip. When I finally told her we were going to Punakana to celebrate our anniversary, her reaction was exactly what I had imagined. First, she stayed quiet for a few seconds, as if she needed to process what I had said. Then she started smiling in a way I still remember perfectly. "Are you serious?" she asked immediately. Then she hugged me really tight. She kept repeating that she had always wanted to see that place. During the weeks leading up to the trip, she was excited almost all the time. She spent hours looking at photos of the resort, talking about the beaches, the water, the weather, and also planning what outfits to pack. I would watch her in those moments and think that I had made the right decision. Besides the trip, I also bought the ring. I didn't pick anything overly expensive, but it was elegant and beautiful. I spent a good amount of time inside a jewelry store comparing different options until I found one that I thought was perfect. While I was doing all that, I often imagined how the moment of the proposal would be. The day of the trip finally arrived. Punta Cana turned out to be even more impressive than I expected. The beaches were huge, the sand was white, and the water was incredibly clear. It was the kind of place many couples traveled to specifically to celebrate important moments in their lives. We spent the first few days just enjoying the location. We walked along the beach, tried the local food, and visited some tourist spots. Madison seemed genuinely happy, very happy, and seeing her like that only made me feel even more certain about what I was about to do. I already had everything planned. The proposal would be on the exact night of our anniversary. I booked a dinner at a quiet restaurant near the beach where you could clearly hear the sound of the ocean. Everything seemed perfect. During dinner, we talked like we always did. We talked about normal things, the places we had visited, how beautiful the scenery was. Nothing weird, nothing that made me suspect what was about to happen. After dinner, we went for a walk on the beach. There were very few people around. Most of the tourists were at the resort hotels or other restaurants. The atmosphere was peaceful, almost silent, and you could hear the waves in the distance. At that moment, I decided the time had come. I stopped walking. Madison looked at me curiously, as if wondering what was going on. I took a deep breath, pulled out the small box with the ring, and got down on one knee in front of her. I clearly remember the expression she had at that moment. At first, she looked surprised, but that surprise didn't last long. I started telling her everything I had been thinking about for months. I talked about our relationship and how important those 2 years had been to me. I told her they had been the most stable years of my life. I also told her I saw her as my partner for the future and that I wanted to build the family we had talked about so many times together. Then I opened the ring box and asked the question, "Will you marry me?" For several seconds, she didn't answer. She just looked at me. But her expression started to change. She didn't look excited. She looked uncomfortable. Finally, she said something I never imagined hearing in that moment. "I'm not ready to get married." At first, I thought she was just nervous. I slowly stood up and asked her what exactly she meant by that. After all, for 2 years she herself had talked about marriage so many times, but Madison avoided looking at me directly. Then she said something I still have a hard time believing I heard. "I do want to get married," she said, "but I always thought I would marry my ex, not you." I felt like the ground disappeared from under my feet. I stood completely silent, trying to understand what I had just heard. Before I could react, she kept talking, and what she said next was even worse. She looked at me with a calmness that I found almost incomprehensible. "I want to try one last time with my ex-boyfriend, and if it doesn't work out, then I'll come back to you." She said it so naturally that it left me completely paralyzed. For several seconds, I didn't know what to say. My mind was trying to find some logical explanation, but nothing made sense. Finally, I asked her the only question that seemed reasonable to me at that moment. "Why are you telling me this now?" My voice sounded a lot calmer than I actually felt. "Why didn't you break up with me earlier and try it with him back then?" Madison sighed as if she were explaining something simple. "Because he texted me a week ago." I immediately felt a knot in my stomach, and she answered with total calm. "When he reached out to me, I felt things again." She said it just like that, without any drama, as if she were remembering a song she liked or a nice moment. Then she added, "He told me he regrets how things ended between us. He thinks maybe we were too young when we broke up and that maybe we could still try again." I looked at her without saying a word. Then she added another sentence that left me even more confused. "I thought maybe I should give him one last chance." At that moment, I felt something very strange. It wasn't just pain, it was also disbelief. So I asked her directly, "And where do I fit in all of this?" She just shrugged a little. "I don't want to lose you either." I remember staring at her when she said that. Then she continued explaining her idea as if it were something completely reasonable. "That is why I told you what I did. I want to try one last time with him, and if it doesn't work out, then I'll come back to you." In that instant, I felt something inside me break, but there was no dramatic scene. I didn't yell, I didn't argue. I simply closed the ring box, put it in my pocket, and looked at her for a few more seconds. Then I said something very simple. "I understand." Madison looked confused by my reaction. "Is that all you're going to say?" I didn't answer. I just turned around and started walking. I heard her call my name, Mason, a couple of times, but I didn't stop. I went back to the hotel in complete silence. I barely slept that night. I spent hours sitting on the bed, staring at the ceiling of the room, trying to understand how my life had reached this point. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to stay in that place any longer. I changed my flight and got an early flight home. When Madison found out I was leaving, she tried to talk to me, but I had nothing left to say. There was nothing to discuss. Before I left for the airport, she met me in the hotel lobby. "Mason," she started to say, but I interrupted her. "You don't need to say anything else." After that, I left. During the flight back, I could barely sleep. I felt a mix of emotions that was hard to describe. Pain, humiliation, anger, sadness, all at the same time. When I finally got home to my apartment, I saw I had several messages on my phone. One of them was from Madison. It was pretty long. I opened it out of pure curiosity. The message said something like this. "Mason, I know all of this happened very fast, and I probably hurt you a lot, but I want you to know that you are a great man. You really are. If things with my ex don't work out, I will come back to you. I promise. I love you." I read that message several times in a row. Even so, I didn't reply. The truth is, I had absolutely nothing to say to her, so I decided to ignore it completely. The 2 months that followed were pretty strange. I am not going to pretend I was okay. In reality, I felt terrible, and it wasn't just because of the breakup. What really got to me was the way everything had happened. Every time someone asked me about Madison, the conversation got awkward. My friends knew I had traveled with the intention of proposing. So when I came back alone, the questions inevitably started. What happened with the proposal? Where's Madison? Did everything go well? At first, I tried to avoid the details, but eventually, I ended up telling them what had really happened, and almost everyone's reaction was the same. They didn't believe me. They thought I was exaggerating or that I had misunderstood the situation. Once, a friend told me, "That sounds too absurd. Nobody would say something like that." But yes, someone had said it. Madison had said it. During those 2 months, I tried to move on with my life as normally as possible. I focused on work, went out with friends when I could, and tried to keep my mind busy so I wouldn't think too much. Still, there were times when the memories came rushing back. The trip, the beach, the moment I kneeled in front of her, and above all, the words I heard afterward. 2 months after all that, something happened that I honestly didn't expect. It was an ordinary afternoon. I was at home watching TV when someone knocked on my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I stood completely frozen. Madison was standing in the hallway. She was carrying a small suitcase and smiling. "Hey," she said. At that moment, I felt a strange mix of surprise and annoyance. I came back, just like I promised. I looked at her without saying anything. She kept talking. "It didn't work out with my ex, but that doesn't matter anymore. I realized you are the person I want to be with." There were a few seconds of silence. I was still trying to process what was happening, but Madison seemed completely convinced that everything she was saying made sense. "We can fix things," she said. "I know I hurt you, but I'm here now." I stared at her for a few seconds and then said the first thing that came to mind. "Madison, you traded a man who was willing to give you everything for a fantasy straight out of a romantic comedy." Her expression changed instantly. "Don't say that," she replied with a shaky voice. I shook my head. "You had a real future right in front of you, and you threw it away for a maybe." Her eyes started to fill with tears. "It wasn't like that," she said. "Then explain to me how it was." She started crying. "I made a mistake," she admitted. "But I am here now. That is what matters." I looked at her in disbelief. "Did you really think this was going to work like this?" "Just give me another chance," she said through her tears. I took a deep breath before answering. "Did you honestly believe that with a few tears and an apology, I was going to run back into your arms?" She didn't say anything. "Get out of here," I continued. "You disgust me." Her tears became even more intense. "Mason, please." But for me, that conversation was already over. I shut the door, and that was the last time I saw her in person. In the weeks that followed, I noticed something curious. Madison started posting pretty strange things on her social media. Sad memes, quotes about regret, images with texts about losing the right person. I didn't react to any of it. I didn't comment. I didn't like anything. One day, she sent me another message. It said something like, "Life has no meaning without you." I read it and replied with something very simple. "Get a hobby and leave me alone." After that message, I didn't receive anything else from her. And as far as I know, that was the last contact we had. If I am honest, there are still times when I remember everything that happened, and it seems completely absurd to me. For 2 years, I was convinced I was building a life with someone. In the end, I found out that to that person, I was nothing more than some sort of backup plan. I don't know what happened with her ex. I also don't know what became of Madison after all that. The only thing I am certain of is that the story ended there, and after everything that happened, I don't have the slightest intention of ever seeing her again. Comment. I wanted to take a moment to talk about the deeper message behind today's video. Sometimes the hardest moments in our lives are actually wake-up calls pushing us to recognize our true worth. Walking away from a situation where you are treated as an option instead of a priority requires an incredible amount of strength. Choosing your peace of mind over a confusing and painful attachment is always the right decision. We all deserve a relationship built on mutual respect, honesty, and genuine commitment. Letting go of someone who does not value you creates the necessary space for the right people to enter your life. Your heart is not a waiting room for someone else to figure out what they want. I hope this reminds you to always set firm boundaries and never settle for less than you deserve. Please take care of yourselves, guard your energy, and remember that healing is a journey worth taking. I look forward to reading your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.